It's good to see you again on At Issue here on WTVP. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and for the next half hour we have an opportunity to look back and look forward in regard to how we elect Peoria City Council members. Right now we have what is called cumulative voting. We're going to talk about that and whether or not it has worked and what the future might hold with Joyce Banks. Joyce was one of the original lawsuit plaintiffs when the lawsuit was filed back in 1987, is that right?
Yes.
And we'll talk about that lawsuit in just a minute with Joyce Banks. And we also have Don Jackson. Don is both the state and local NAACP president. At least for another 3 months, you're the state president.
At least for another 3 months, right.
10 years, and you're saying?
I'm enough. That's enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Time to retire.
All right. Let's take a look back first. In just a bit of history for everybody. 1973, the council went to 5 district and 3 at large. That was a measure that was mostly led by the League of Women Voters. 1987, and Don, you ran in that race, right?
Right.
And then after that race, a group of plaintiffs filed a lawsuit. Can you tell me a little bit about the lawsuit?
Well, the whole basis for the lawsuit was to ensure that minority individuals had an opportunity to represent the community sitting on the city council as well as the park district and the school board. Part of that lawsuit meant that we had to do a study of the history of voting and polarized voting in Peoria over its history. And we did that with a professor out of Springfield. And we talked to quite a few individuals. We went through NAACP records, and we could show without question that minority candidates people tended to vote for minority candidates, and white individuals tended to vote for white candidates. We had very good candidates run who were quite capable of representing the entire community. But again, looking at the precincts, we could see where white individuals would not vote for those minority candidates, Don Jackson being one of those who was not successful at large. So it was determined without question that at large districts or at large voting was discriminatory in terms of electing minority candidates.
What did you ask the court for with regard, we'll talk about the Park District, et cetera, later, but with regard to the city, what was your hope originally in that lawsuit?
Originally, our hope was that we would have 10 districts. That's what we wanted. Again, there were already at large.
No at large?
No at large.
Oh, okay.
No at large at all. And before we got to the courts, the attorneys were at the bargaining table trying to get an agreement reached prior to going to court. And all we could get was the cumulative voting model, but there was an insistence that the at-large seats remain intact. Again, we did then agree to extending that. At the time, it was 3 at-large seats and became 5 at-large seats, which again then meant that there could be a possibility that we'd get 2 individuals on the council with that instead of just 1. So we went with the increasing by 2 the at-large seats and cumulative voting, giving the community an opportunity to cast 5 votes for 1 individual.
And Don, for the benefit of those that may not be familiar with cumulative voting, a brief description.
Well, it basically means that every voter has 5 votes in the at-large election. It doesn't apply to the district elections. It just applied to the at-large election. It also, at the time, didn't apply to the school board or the park district. It only just those five seats, and that allowed the voter to cast 1 vote for each of the 5 candidates of his or her choice, or they could cast all 5 votes for 1 candidate, or they could split them up in any combination that they wanted, 2 and 2, 3 and 2, any way that they wanted to break up the 5, the number 5, they could do that.
So it was the classic 1 person, 5 votes policy.
That's exactly right, yes.
So before we continue with what happened with the city, a little bit of historical background with regard to the Park District and the school board.
Well, if you recall, at large was the theme of the day. So again, we're looking at districts in both the Park District races and the school board. And to my recollection, the only African American who had been elected to the Park District before the change was Adrian Hinton.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There was a couple after that, John South, and there was somebody before Bob Johnson, but John South was one of those that came later, yes.
And for the school board and the at-large, the only person who had been elected was now Judge Mary McDade, who'd been the one. So historically, again, there had not been a great opportunity of African Americans getting elected, and so we wanted to go to district again. Looking at that time, particularly at District 1, where the lion's share of African Americans resided, so that we could almost ensure that there would be one African American sitting on both of those boards, governing boards.
In terms of representation from the minority community, it seems that since 1987, both the Park Board and the school district have had a fair complement of minority representation.
Well, yes, the Park Board has had two since they broke it up to 3, 3, and 1. One, Bob Johnson represents the 1st District, and Jackie Petty represents the 2nd District. We've never had a representative from the 3rd District, African American, from the 3rd District. And the school board has been, again, represented primarily from the 2nd and 3rd District, one from the 1st District, Martha Ross, and then we've had a combination of people that have come from the 2nd District that have been on the school board, and as we speak, we have Lynn Kostick and Linda Butler on the school board.
As well as Martha.
As well as Martha. Yeah. Martha, 1st District, Lynn and Linda Butler are from the 2nd District.
So back to the city, I want to hear from both of you, but with regard to cumulative voting and the 5 at-large seats, in your opinion, has that been successful?
In my opinion, yes. Had we not had the 5 seats, the top 3 individuals in that first race out would have been seated and were seated were not African Americans. Nat Ledoux came in 4th, I believe, and the same thing again with Eric Turner, his first time
1995
around. Then after that, I think we all know, and a political scientist will say that once you are an incumbent, you have a kind of heads up, an advantage to someone who's a novice and running for the first time. So certainly after he had been in office for 4 years, and Eric Turner did have an advantage from having served on the board.
And he's been elected each time since.
He has.
Don Jackson, in your opinion, has cumulative voting with 5 at-large seats been a success?
I think in terms of exclusively focusing on the African American community, perhaps I would agree with Joyce the first time around, but since then I'd say no, because it has benefited members of the non-African American community more than it has us. I think when Gary Sandberg, for example, figured out how to do it and decided to leave the 2nd District as the district councilman and run for the at-large seat, 2 years after he had been elected district councilman, he had figured it out that I could get more votes doing it the cumulative voting way than I can otherwise. And so he switched over to become the at-large representative for the city instead of the 2nd District. And so it's worked well for him. And I'm told, and I didn't know this, but I'm told that Chuck Weaver has been very successful using the system as well.
He was the top, when you consider the plump vote, and the plump vote is when someone casts all 5 votes for one candidate. Plumpers, he was number 1 in attracting plumpers at the polls. And if you look back, and by the way, I had a chance to talk to Dr. Larry Aspen at Bradley University, and he has studied at length the elections ever since the lawsuit that was filed back in 1987. And his numbers show that the minority candidates have not done well in attracting those plumpers. They have not attracted the bullet vote, so to speak. Gary Sandberg traditionally has been the highest one. In this last election, it was Chuck Weaver. And then you see other majority candidates who have done well in that regard. Dr. Aspen suggests that it has been a success, but he says it's a success because our expectations were too high at the beginning. We expected more candidates to be elected, more minority preferred candidates to be elected. Do you think that is the case, that the minority community may have had too high of an expectation?
I don't think so. I think we wanted, to say that we wanted one person on there is not high expectation to me. That's not high. To think that we would have 3 to 4, then that would be high expectations. So I don't think so. I think we have had a minority, an African American sitting on the council since cumulative voting. We've had African Americans sitting on the Park District and on the school board since the lawsuit. So we wanted to ensure that there was a voice there. We have to, and I think we own up to the fact and take ownership that that we haven't always had the best candidate, the best individual running as a candidate. So we have to take some responsibility for that as well. To say that other people have looked at the plump vote, as you called it, and used it to their advantage, well, it's out there for everyone to use, and some people are more skilled than others in attracting that core that will really use that. But overall, I think we accomplished what we set out to do.
Mm-hmm. And just for clarification, excuse me for interrupting you, Don, but when Joyce refers to one minority candidate on the council, she means one at-large minority candidate, because the 1st District has been represented for the most part by a minority, Clyde Gully being the current representative of the 1st District.
Right. And I think to the extent that we were able to elect minority representation to the school board in the Park District, it's been successful as far as that's concerned, although it's been confined to just 2 areas. It seems as though African Americans still cannot get the support of, and good candidates of individuals in the 3rd District in either one of those two races. But as far as the council is concerned, I remember Gerald Fisher ran, and he ran behind me in the election that you mentioned earlier. He was number 5, and I was number 4. But with Clyde and his predecessors in the 1st District, we've always had one on the city council. But we have not been successful in getting anybody elected at large, because I still don't think that it's worked favorably as far as when we talk about success. It was reasonable for us to expect to get one additional council member from the at-large in addition to what we had in the 1st District. That was a reasonable expectation.
Yes.
I don't think it was an exaggerated expectation at all. It hasn't worked out that way, but I think that was very reasonable expectation.
And I did not mean, let me correct, I did mean that we've had, if we look at the 1st District, and I ran for the 1st District, Jim Polk and I were the 2 who came out of the primary, so he was the first African American to be elected to the city council. Then after Jim Polk, then was Andre Bohannon, and now Clyde Gully. So we haven't had, a long.
There's not a long history, because Kenny Shepard was before.
And Mudd.
And
Joe Mudd.
Joe
I
Mudd.
think you remember Joe Mudd they sat in those seats prior.
Is part of the problem voter turnout? If you look at the numbers, the African American community has 20%, in round numbers, 20% of the Peoria population. Yet the African American community only has 12% of the voting population. In other words, turnout is lower for African American precincts than it is for the white precincts or white dominated precincts. Is there some way to increase that, or is that
But to look at the races, when President Obama was a candidate running for president, look at the election. When with Jahan Gordon running, look at the numbers who turn out. There is a sense sometimes I think that it doesn't matter what we do in terms of voting and putting people in office. There's so much an individual can do. And there's some truth to that, but it depends on the election and depends on the candidate as well. I think that is with most people, and we do see some folk benefiting greatly from when they run, and others who have not sold themselves to the African American community.
I think there's another dynamic that works as well. Can we do better? Yes, and that's one of the things the NAACP is working on. We have a very active and very strong candidate, our campaign rather, to make sure people are registered to vote, make sure they understand the issues, and then during the election cycle, make sure they get out to in fact vote. How they vote is their business. But just to get them to the polls to exercise the franchise is one of our main goals. But if you look back, Peoria used to be from the African American community standpoint, used to be a very concise community. I mean, we truly were a village. You probably remember when you first came in, you about knew everybody in the city of Peoria who was African American and where they lived. They lived in the south side, the north end, and then out in a place called Peoria Heights, which we called the racetrack. And those were the three areas of concentration of African Americans. And you knew everybody in the city. There's been a whole change in the dynamics. There have been people that have migrated to Peoria who have never bought into whatever interest Peoria has. In other words, they're here, but they still have not bought into the community enough to worry about getting out to vote. Those are the most difficult people to encourage to get out to vote. And so I think you got that dynamic playing in Peoria as well. And I'm not sure how you solve that problem. Maybe you got some answers, Joyce.
I wish I did. Yeah. But you're right. When I was in college in the 70s, Caterpillar recruited very heavily on African American campuses to bring folks. So you came from home, and it was the longest time. Most of us, when we talked about home, it wasn't Peoria. Right. It was somewhere else. So, but getting involved in the community and Peoria actually being home to folk. The other thing I heard time and time again is the whole Carver Center, people that grew up through there and what it meant to the community and being able to socialize. But when moving to Peoria, a lot of African American professionals moved to other areas, and there wasn't that community that you know so well, and that was still intact when I moved here. And again, we had there was concentrated voter education and turnout, much like what the NAACP is doing currently. More of that has to be done to again, because we forget our history. We really forget our history, and being able to share with individuals today some of the hardships and the pains endured by those in this community to ensure that we had the right to vote. It has to be taught again to those who are 18 and under 40.
Well,
under 40, yeah.
Let's look to the future then in terms of there's a change that could be coming. What would you prefer to see? Would you like to keep the current system? Would you like to change to something else?
Oh, I think I would like to change to something else. I personally would prefer, and we're talking about the council race.
Yes.
I got a different opinion for the other two.
Well, let's talk about council.
All right. I would prefer to see 10 districts. And if my memory serves me correctly, when I was a young lad in this community, we had 10 districts. And the League of Women Voters changed it. For what reason, I don't know. But we did have 10 districts. And so I would like to go back to 10 districts for a lot of reasons. First of all, I think it benefits the candidates. They have an area that is more constricted to campaign in. It's good for the citizens because they can identify specifically their neighbor who is their councilman and take their problems to him or her at a moment's notice. So I think it benefits everybody in the community to have 10 districts, and then the individuals can work to see that their agenda fits in with the agenda of the entire city of Peoria.
And the same question to you, Joyce.
Initially, the plaintiffs wanted 10 districts. And I would love to see that happen again. I think what has happened, too, with the at-large seats, there's a hierarchy. And it seems like there is the mayor, and then there's the at-large, and then there are the district council people. And then when you look at the districts, you will see out of the 5 districts, it would not be a surprise that there would be 4 coming out of one district. So there's an over-representation of districts, say 4 or 5, than all of the other districts combined. So certainly, if I think the 10 districts would be the better choice.
And districts 4 and 5 are north and northwest, as many of you probably know. So what is the likelihood, what is the process that we need to go through if this change is to take place, whatever the change might be?
Well, there's one definite process, and that is if there's going to be a change, first of all, there has to be a buy-in from the African American community, really the plaintiffs who were part of the original lawsuit, and then there has to be approval by the court to any change in the current court order. Now, there's some in the community that believe that a referendum is also necessary. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that. But what I do have an opinion on is that a referendum is not enough. I think you still have referendum plus in order to make a change.
I think it'd be easy to get buy-in from the original plaintiffs because you're the only one left locally. Is that right?
I'm all for 10 districts.
Well, there you go, Don.
All right.
So, but if can the court, and so this is a federal court, right?
Right.
Can the federal courthouse say specifically what you can move to, or can they just say, yes, we can rescind the 1987 order?
Oh, I think they can approve what you go to as well. I mean, they're going to have to use the same criteria, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act rather, to judge the merits of a change in the system and how it's going to be applicable to the African American residents. So it's not just a matter of saying you can make the move. They also have to make sure that there is a legal reason to justify the move.
What is your, are you active in this process at this point?
No. There is that we have had groups of people about once a year for the last, since 1987, talk about it. And we came very close, I think, a year or two ago of doing something, and it kind of stalled. But I am willing to. And I'll tell anyone who asks me personally, I would support 10 districts. The other caveat I would throw in that I would love to see those districts drawn by political scientists, or would not like to see them drawn by politicians.
Okay, I had a chance to talk to the president of the League of Women Voters. She indicated to me that the League would like to see at least 2 at-large representatives because they would represent the whole city, and the League feels that's important to have a couple of council members to represent the city as an entirety. Your response to that?
Well, first of all, I think the mayor is the one that represents the whole city, so they've got that kind of representation in the government that we have. And I'm not so sure that having 2 individuals who allegedly would represent the whole system, the whole city, would in fact work out that way. And so therefore, I don't think I would support it. Make no mistake, politicians count votes. And in terms of providing representation, if you had 2 city councilmen at large, the bulk of their representation is going to be in the area where they either live or receive the most votes. And so that means that those who are not in their area, much like it is today, won't receive much of that entire over the city representation that the league would like to see. So no, I don't see that as an issue. I think that it would be much better representation for everybody if we had the 10 districts.
We'll have to wait and see how that turns out.
For real.
And we've run out of time. So thank you so much to Joyce Banks, an original plaintiff in the 1987 lawsuit that resulted in the at-large cumulative voting, and to Don Jackson, a local attorney and right now state president for another couple of months, and local president NAACP. Thank you for joining us on At Issue, and we'll see you again 1 week from today for another edition of At Issue.